Story 1. It always starts with a small sore throat that doesn't seem to go away for hours. At that point, I figure it's a done deal. Story 2. It's like a sour feeling, but the sensation has a smell and taste that aren't sour or unpleasant. They exist in the back of my nasal cavity, and I experience them the day before I get sick. Story 3. I can start to feel it in my joints. I get achy, and then, next thing I know, I'm sick. I am dealing with terrible allergies right now, and last night I sensed it was coming on. So I spent my last few dollars on eye drops, allergy medication, and saline spray for my nose. Story 4. That general wimpy feeling referred to as malaise is characterized by a sense of weakness, shakiness, skin crawling, and chills. I experience it right before I get sick, and I know I'm about to spend a couple of days in bed. Story 5. I have a little pit in the back of my throat. It typically comes the night before, and I start moping around, complaining to my wife that I am going to be sick. I have about a 30% accuracy with this, but when I am right, I let her know I knew it was coming. Story 6. Lower back pain. If I experience inexplicable lower back pain, and I'm not referring to the sensation that something severe is wrong, like a pulled muscle, then it's a sign. It usually feels as if my muscles are tightening up, almost as if I've been sitting for too long. Then comes the sweating. Story 7. I have a heightened awareness of my arm hair. I can feel the follicles, and rubbing against the grain feels unpleasant. This is an indication of the flu. Story 8. Serious brain fog. Usual aches and symptoms like a sore throat and a runny nose could just be allergies. However, if I'm struggling to form a coherent thought, my body is fighting off something. Story 9. My skin becomes very sensitive, almost giving a goosebumps feeling. This happens everywhere. I also feel very achy and tired. Story 10. When I feel an obstruction in the upper part of my throat, where my nasal cavity joins, it feels like something is there that I need to swallow. It can be likened to the moment when I experience the slightest imbalance. Story 11. It settles into my weak areas. My neck hurts and my lower back hurts first. The next sign is a very big sneeze. Story 12. I can smell it on my own breath or in my nose. I have told people this in the past and they don't believe me, but I swear I have a 100% success rate. I have even been able to smell it on my wife's breath when kissing her. A few months ago, I smelled it so strongly that I told her, "You were getting sick. Give it a few days." In a few days, she was blaming me for giving it to her. Story 13. My mom used to say, "Your eyes look sick." And sure enough, the next day, I would be sick. It's still true all these years later. Story 14. That feeling in the back of your throat is difficult to explain. It doesn't hurt, yet you can feel it, and it extends between your nose and throat. I can't explain it, but that's my first sign. Story 15. Grip test. I am making a fist to see if my grip is any lighter. Combined with how I am feeling, this is an indication that my body is fighting something off. Story 16. My ears feel clogged, and when I notice it, I realize that I am likely getting the flu, or rather, that I already have it and am just beginning to feel its effects. Story 17. My knees hurt for no reason, and I suddenly crave orange juice with high pulp and chicken noodle soup with the intensity of a teenager who hasn't eaten in 4 hours. Story 18. For me, coffee does not taste good. I drink coffee every morning, except when I am getting sick. I will take a sip or two and just do not want any more. If tea sounds better than coffee, I know I am coming down with something. Story 19. When I get sinus infections, my teeth and hair hurt, and the hair issue is especially hard to explain. Sometimes I wake up in the morning after being a bit sniffly for a few days, and suddenly I have sore teeth and hair. This isn't strictly sickness, but when I'm about to get a migraine, I suddenly experience slight double vision, and everything has a light yellow halo around it. Or more like a shadow, but the shadow is butter-colored. I also become extremely sensitive to my surroundings. Food smells make me nauseous, and soapy smells make me dizzy. I can feel heat radiating from people. I'm sensitive to loud noises, and I can hear whispers from a long distance away. I've heard a student whisper derogatory comments about me from across a large classroom. My clothes feel scratchy and too tight. When I realize I'm about to get a migraine, I need to get myself into a cool, dark room, drink ice water with my medication, remove all my clothes, and lie in bed with a white noise machine playing softly. If I don't, I'm likely to vomit in public. Story 20. I can suddenly feel my hot breath from my nose on my upper lip. It's like a fever warning. I can dismiss all other signs as something I ate, or maybe I just need sleep or water, but the hot breath from my nose is a clear indication. Story 21. My skin hurts to the touch. Even a soft blanket brushing against my skin feels very uncomfortable, and I have no idea why. Story 22. When I swallow and my ears pop multiple times, I realize it has begun and cannot be stopped. Story 23. I get emotional. My ex-husband, who is still my best friend and realized he was gay in 2020, told me to check my temperature. I asked why, and he said, "You're emotional and you don't do emotions." I had a fever of 102. I ended up in the emergency room with norovirus, an upper respiratory infection, and sinus tachycardia. He can diagnose me from 128 miles away. Story 24. I feel a sick sensation and often burst into tears when the fever starts, which usually occurs when my temperature ranges from 38.5 to 39.5 degrees Celsius, 101.3 to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Story 25. As someone with asthma, I can sense when a cold is approaching days in advance. Breathing becomes difficult, especially at night. Story 26. Sweaty sheets. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm drenched in sweat, I'm not going to make it. Story 27. For me, it is a very specific taste that I detect when I burp. This taste usually develops about 6 hours before I first notice a sore throat. In some cases, unusually intense fatigue is also present, but not always. Story 28. Toothache. It's not as unusual as it sounds. Apparently, swollen sinuses can cause toothache. Story 29. Two strange things happen to me. My blood sugar rises significantly. It reaches a point where just thinking about carbohydrates causes it to spike into the 200s, and no amount of insulin seems to lower it. That is, until I take a large dose of insulin, which then sends me low. The other issue is excessive earwax buildup. I flush it out with a product to manage it. Despite being aware of these warning signs, I often only recognize I'm unwell after both occur. Story 30. I can tell I am getting the flu or something similar when I have a fever the day before the symptoms begin. My lower back and testicles start to ache with a dull, painful sensation. Story 31. Sick as in vomit? I break out in a cold sweat right before. Sick as in ill? I tend to experience really bad headaches and body aches with chills. Story 32. I know that if I lose my taste for coffee, I am most definitely getting sick. If I feel bad and coffee still sounds appealing, I know it is probably allergies. Story 33. When I start to get a cold, I can usually feel it coming, like a scratchy throat and a stuffy nose. Story 34. I'm active, so if I picture myself going for my usual run and feel repulsed by it, then I am definitely unwell. Physically, the first sign is swollen lymph nodes or mild nausea, depending on the illness I have. Story 35. I have allergies, so a tickle in my throat or a stuffy nose is often misleading. However, the fatigue I start to feel when I'm sick is how I know it's not just allergies. Story 36. Sore throat and tiredness at the same time. Sometimes taking vitamin B12 and using colloidal silver spray helps alleviate it before it worsens. Story 37. Whenever my throat feels like there is something back there, such as mucus, it doesn't go away and it hurts to swallow. Story 38. Sick with what? Viral or bacterial? A specific headache, unusual exhaustion, maybe a tickle in the throat, and some sinus congestion. At this stage, I think I can still fight this, so I come out swinging with turmeric, ginger, and all the superfoods, then maybe take a shower and rest. A sauna or some sweating would help. Low stress. If I didn't sleep well or my body just can't manage it, then the symptoms increase. Cough, maybe fever and chills. My throat is more sore, and there's probably extreme fatigue and muscle aches. Now I'm feeling unwell, and I need to hunker down for a day or two and eat superfood soup. Back in the day, they recommended a whiskey concoction with lemon and honey or something. I've always wanted to try that, for science. Story 39. I have a sore throat on the right side, near my esophagus, that feels tender. I can locate it by pressing on it with my finger. This is where all my sore throats start. It's quite strange. I also know I have a sinus infection when I notice I've had no energy for 3 or 4 days. I usually go to get antibiotics when that happens because I recognize the symptoms. Story 40. I never get sick anymore, not since I had a major flu infection in 2013. I was sick for 3 weeks, lost 5 kilograms of body weight, and had a fever for a whole week. Since I overcame that setback, I have not been sick or had a cold. I did not get sick during the COVID-19 pandemic and never stopped working during that period. If I want to be home from work for a few days, I have to pretend to be ill. I do get mentally tired after long working periods, and sometimes I just need to relax for a few days, but other than that, I never get physically sick. Story 41. I never realize my bronchitis is actually getting pretty serious until I am coughing up green mucus while holding a mirror to avoid hitting my face on the sink faucet. That's the sign I usually recognize. Story 42. I have no ability to concentrate or get started on anything. I wonder what is wrong with me, and it turns out it's because I was on the verge of becoming ill. Story 43. I have a fever and feel dizzy. I can manage the sniffles and a sore throat, but I know I'm in trouble when the fever and wooziness start to kick in. Story 44. When everything hurts, like when every muscle that attaches to bone feels sore, as if from a workout, but I haven't done anything. That's when it's time to lie down. Story 45. My ears feel like endless pits, and digging at them with a cotton swab doesn't have the same satisfying sensation as it does when I'm not feeling ill. Story 46. All of my piercings become very irritated and crusty, even the healed ones. That is always the first sign for me. It has been like that for many years. Story 47. I experience a specific sensation in my chest that is difficult to describe. It feels like my lungs are slightly sore, accompanied by a chill, though not cold. Sometimes, I also feel small zaps, similar to brain zaps experienced from serotonin syndrome after abruptly stopping an antidepressant. It resembles a tiny glitch in a camera feed, where my visual and spatial perception seems to flutter briefly. Story 48. I have a sore throat or a tickle in my throat, but I can always tell if it's going to be an actual illness or just a simple cold. If I touch the back of my throat with my tongue and feel little bumps, and if those bumps hurt when I touch them, then I know I'm getting sick. Story 49. It always starts with a little tingle in my throat, which usually turns into a head cold that lasts for a day or two. Story 50. It is strange for me as it happened both times I had severe COVID-19. I have one tooth that always gives me trouble, and my lower back is damaged from having children. Each time, before any other symptoms, I experience pain in that tooth and my lower back aches. Story 51. When I suddenly feel too lethargic to function, I usually just give up and melt onto the floor. My temperature is almost always fine, but the fever will arrive tomorrow. Story 52. A strange feeling in my soft palate, the roof of my mouth where my nose drains, along with itching directly in the center of my back. Story 53. I don't know why it is normalized in the West. Not having a bowel movement once a day is a definite sign of potential problems to come. Story 54. I wake up with a dry throat that goes away after drinking some water. It doesn't return until the next morning. Usually, if this happens 3 times, I know I'm about to be sick for a week or more. Story 55. When the inside of my nose and throat becomes extra sensitive to the air I breathe, it often leads to a cough and a sore throat soon after. Story 56. My lower back always feels like I need to crack it or stretch it out, but that's not the case. That's a sign. Story 57. I refer to it as hot saliva. The soft palate at the back of my mouth becomes warm and irritated, somewhat itchy. If this persists for more than 12 hours, I anticipate that I will feel ill within the next 24 hours. Story 58. I have eustachian tube dysfunction, which is the tube that runs between the ear and nose. The only way I can describe it is that my ears start to feel very full. I'm sure it's from increased sinus pressure. Story 59. My neck and head get stiff. I wonder why I am stiff when I didn't sleep awkwardly. Then, a day or so later, the sore throat and congestion start, and I realize why. I have learned to recognize the connection. When my neck is stiff and sore, I know I am about to get sick. Story 60. I have a neurological disorder, so any inflammation in my body is extremely painful and distressing. I can usually tell when I am getting sick because my pain and seizures worsen. Story 61. I start feeling cold and uncomfortable. I love cold weather and temperatures. When I don't enjoy it, I know I'm getting sick. Story 62. I have a scratchy throat and an achy, tired feeling without having done anything to deserve it. An hour of vomiting usually precedes the onset of cold symptoms. Story 63. I genuinely experience insomnia. I often wake up at 2 a.m. and cannot go back to sleep after falling asleep around midnight. I think to myself that I am getting sick, and then I am usually ill the following day. Story 64. Usually a day or two before any other symptoms, it feels like I have burned my tongue. Not just a small spot, but the entire surface. It is quite strange. Story 65. Sore throat. Feels more like I swallowed battery acid. And it burns. Story 66. The various bodily secretions include nasal mucus, throat mucus, and eye discharge during a cold. It may also involve pus from an infected wound or unusual discharge in the case of a vaginal infection. Examples include these types of bodily fluids. Story 67. I always get a nagging headache that pain relievers do not alleviate, about 24 hours before the rest of the symptoms begin. Story 68. This isn't about me, but my boyfriend. I can usually tell when he is getting sick before he feels any symptoms because he develops a strong body odor that smells almost like raw garlic. He has had COVID-19 twice in the 5 years we have been together, and both times the smell was particularly strong the day before he got sick. Story 69. I have a keen sense of smell. If I'm getting sick, I notice it before other symptoms appear. A cold smells like onion, stomach sickness smells like rotten eggs, a fever smells like plastic, and stress has a bloody scent. The funny thing is that when I smell these scents outside, my brain thinks I'm getting sick. Story 70. When I feel completely overwhelmed and unable to function at a high level, I cry. Then I realize that the reason I am not functioning is that I am sick. It is almost a relief to recognize that I am not depressed or despairing. I am sick. Story 71. Please someone relate to me on this. My bottom front teeth started feeling strange, right at the roots with an aching, uncomfortable, and sick feeling. This has been happening ever since I was little. Story 72. I am nearly constantly unwell. My dreaded sign is a day when my sinuses are clear, and I have no headaches. Story 73. The odd mix of feeling hungry yet slightly nauseous. Eating something small alleviates the feeling, but it only occurs right before I get sick. Story 74. I can feel the warm air on my lips coming out of my nose when I exhale. I have no idea why, but it always ends with me getting sick. Story 75. My skin becomes very sensitive, to the point of feeling sore from the clothes against it. I alternate between feeling feverish and feeling chilled to the bone, regardless of the ambient temperature. Story 76. I have not heard many people say this, but my skin becomes very sensitive, often to the point where touching it is uncomfortable. Story 77. I know as soon as I wake up that my nasal passage is blocked, and I can barely breathe. It is the worst feeling. Story 78. I sneeze out of nowhere. It's usually 1 or 2 days before I get sick. I sneeze randomly a few times, and I know that I'm going to be unwell. Story 79. I have a dental implant in one of my molars. It starts to ache intensely near my sinuses. It feels like a weather vane indicating that I am getting a cold. Story 80. Ever since I was little, I knew I was getting sick when I became very sensitive to light, especially fluorescent light, and everything felt too bright. This is now also a trigger for me as an adult before a migraine attack. Story 81. I always start with a sore throat for a day or two. Then I experience full body aches and my eyes feel hot. A day or two after that, I am fully in flu mode. Story 82. If I feel unwell, it could be due to being overly tired, having allergies, or possibly getting sick. I will know for sure that illness is approaching because the thought of drinking coffee will upset my stomach. I am someone who has coffee every single day. I love it. Story 83. My watch tells me that I have noticed a higher than normal resting heart rate the day before, and usually it returns to normal by the time I actually start feeling sick. Story 84. As someone who has been sick for 2 days, I experience symptoms that resemble allergies. Additionally, my skin becomes very sensitive. Story 85. Mine usually starts with a lot of sinus issues. Drainage, congestion, blockage, and swollen sinuses that make me look half Klingon. I experience a sore throat from sinus drainage and sometimes a cough. While much of this is typical for me due to allergies, any discoloration in the mucus or severe symptoms generally indicates that I've caught something again. Story 86. Ever since I discovered my mild allergic reaction to jellyfish when I was a child, the day before I become ill, the site of my allergic flare-up becomes itchy and red as a warning. It hasn't failed me yet. Story 87. My nose gets a strange tickle the day before I become really sick. My glands do not hurt, but it feels like they are dancing. I can't explain it. Story 88. It usually begins with a sore throat that starts as a tickle you cannot get rid of until it becomes painful to swallow. Alternatively, it may start with a lingering headache that lasts a day or two before other symptoms appear. Story 89. Extreme dryness. You wake up with a dry throat, and your nose burns when you breathe. You would rather go back to sleep than face these new symptoms. Story 90. Sinus pressure. As soon as it hits, it doesn't matter if I have any other symptoms. I am sick. I will need antibiotics, or it will just turn into an ear infection and a lung infection. Story 91. I feel really tired and achy, and it happens in a very short period of time, like within an hour. It's exactly the same feeling I experienced 60 to 90 minutes after receiving a vaccination or booster. I'm fine, and then suddenly I am not. I have fibromyalgia, and it feels like the onset of a flare, but a flare develops slowly over about 12 hours. There's no gradual onset when my immune system launches an attack. Story 92. I start out feeling really tired for no reason. That doesn't clue me in, but then I start getting muscle aches and I think, oh yeah, I was super tired this morning. The combination of the two makes me realize I'm sick. Story 93. Sore throat and a tingling sensation in the nose, followed by postnasal drip and persistent coughing for weeks. Story 94. Irritation in the back of my throat. The soap has a strange smell. Snot turns a sickly green color. I usually know 3 to 6 days in advance if I'm getting sick. Sometimes there's a false recovery for a day or so if it takes longer. The soap smell is clear evidence for me that I'm getting sick. It's nice in the way it warns me. It allows me to get my affairs in order and prepare food and supplies for the struggle. Story 95. Wake up feeling tired and a bit shaky, able to power through the day, and then come home and immediately fall asleep. Story 96. It's that horrible, unsure feeling, just off balance and sensitive to things I normally don't even think about. Story 97. I know it isn't just allergies when I start craving fast food, which I haven't eaten in years. It's strange, but I think it's because I rely on comfort food when I get sick. Story 98. Unfortunately for me, it feels like a game of chance because I am immunocompromised, and my allergies become severe enough that I cannot distinguish them from the common cold. If I do not have my allergy medicine, I may experience significant discomfort. However, if I take my allergy medicine, the worst I will experience is a stuffy nose. Story 99. Lower back soreness followed by a full body warmth, leading to a fever. It always happens in that order. Story 100. My ears feel muffled, and my throat feels like ants are crawling inside, which makes me cough. Story 101. Only because it is happening right now, there are 2 kinds of illness. 1, a sticky, sour feeling when I swallow, which is usually a 2-week respiratory illness, or 2, I am tender to the touch all over, and my eyes feel like they are about to pop out of my head because of the pressure. This is how I currently feel. I assume it is just the pollen, but I feel awful. Story 102. Black patches on my forehead are similar to how your skin changes color when you have a bruise, just on my forehead. I will feel unwell within 2 days of them appearing. Story 103. Usually it's the night before. I have a lucid dream, followed by a day where my body feels good and I am in a great mood. It's the best I've ever felt. The next morning is a polar opposite. Story 104. Sore throat and feeling cold indicate that I am very fatigued. I normally run warm, so when I feel overall cold, I know that I am unwell. Story 105. My throat feels itchy, as if I need to clear it to relieve the discomfort. That's when I realize I might be getting sick. Story 106. Craving cheese, milk, and yogurt. All mucus-inducing dairy products that one shouldn't eat when feeling sick. Story 107. My skin gets achy or sore sometimes, and I fall asleep at a reasonable hour. There is a clear indication 1 to 2 days prior. Story 108. For me, it's always when I'm extremely tired for no good reason. A workout that I'm usually good at suddenly feels like I'm moving a body made of sandbags. Story 109. When I start to slowly lose my voice but otherwise feel fine. 2 or 3 days later, I am really sick. Story 110. The day before, I was feeling unwell, sensing something was off, but I couldn't identify what it was. The next day, I woke up, drank coffee, and noticed that my throat felt a bit strange. I thought it might go away, but it didn't. Later that day, my sore throat worsened. Depending on how severe the cold or flu was, that night I experienced fevers and very dry sinuses, feeling like I had a cactus in my throat. Story 111. Usually, I strangely get a fever as the first sign, followed by a headache, and then a sore throat introduces itself. Story 112. I never get headaches except when I am sick. When I do get a headache, it means I am coming down with something. Story 113. I start craving orange juice. I'm not sure why this happens, but as soon as I want to drink a carton of orange juice, I know I'm going to be unproductive for the next week. Story 114. My eyes do something unusual. They suddenly feel incredibly tired, as if they need to shut to stop a burning sensation. This lasts for just a moment or two. Typically, the next day I experience a sensation in my throat where I can feel my swallowing. Not quite a sore throat, but I am aware of it. By later that day, I often feel a cold setting in. Story 115. Looking sideways hurts. I immediately try to get my hands on Sambucol and take a whole bottle, then half at bedtime and half in the morning. It helped me get through clinicals where sick children were constantly infecting me. Story 116. A sore throat is usually how it starts for me. I also notice in hindsight that I have been tired for days. Story 117. When I start feeling a sharp pain in the back of my throat, it stings to swallow, and that's how I know I'm beginning to get sick. Another sign is developing a cold sore on my lip, although it doesn't always occur. It usually happens when I am very ill, experiencing a fever and body aches. Story 118. For some reason, Gatorade tastes awful when I'm getting sick. Usually, I like it, but the moment a cold comes around, I'm gagging after a single sip. Story 119. I find that it's when I feel dehydrated, even though I know I have had enough water. It tells me that my body is using more energy than it should be. Story 120. I normally have a very high pain tolerance, having played 2 weeks of sports with a broken knee without realizing it. However, when I get sick, my skin becomes hypersensitive to the point that wind and rain feel like stabbing pins and needles. I literally cannot have people touch me when I'm sick because my skin feels so fragile. Story 121. I suddenly decide that every artistic venture is a great idea. Oh, a song based on the 2011 film Romeo and Juliet? Sounds great. Let's do it. Story 122. There's an itch in my throat that doesn't go away with a sip of a carbonated drink. I felt it on Monday and knew I was in trouble. Now it's Friday, and half of my diet this week has consisted of cold medication. I can't breathe through my nose, my throat hurts, and I'm going to use my entire tube of lip balm because my lips are cracking. Story 123. Excessive amounts of saliva are usually my first indicator. If not that, a pseudo fever a couple of days beforehand. I don't register an actual fever during that time, but my body essentially acts as if I have one, accompanied by the sweats, chills, and achy joints typical of a fever. My former boss thought I was faking it once and forced me to come in because I couldn't obtain a doctor's note. I didn't have a vehicle at that time and wasn't going to take the bus and expose others. Work was within walking distance. I ended up throwing up on the sales floor, and he didn't doubt me for the 5 years after when I would say, "I'm getting sick and need a week off." It didn't happen frequently, maybe just once a year, but still. Story 124. When I wake up and my entire body feels like I was hit by a truck, but I didn't do anything strenuous the day before. Story 125. A new game just came out. Oh no, I think I might be getting sick. I better call in sick so I don't spread it at work. Story 126. I cannot stop sneezing. I sneeze repeatedly until my nose becomes congested and stuffed, and then I feel sick. Story 127. I have a sore throat, and my sinuses and the top of my nose feel different or sore. Since catching COVID, my tongue also swells to varying degrees depending on how sick or run down I feel. Story 128. My hair follicles become very sensitive, especially on my arms and scalp. Then I know I have only a few hours to stock up on medication and soup before I become incapacitated. I remember telling my mom that my hair hurts, and she recognized that a cold was coming. The human body is fascinating. Story 129. Headaches and a sick feeling or butterflies in my stomach. Sometimes I don't get a warning. I just experience it suddenly. Very strange. Story 130. My sneezes feel different. I sneeze more. If it is a virus, I experience a sensation in a sort of butterfly shape radiating out of my spine. It feels similar to catching an arm or leg hair on the inside of a jacket, but instead, it radiates from my back and down my arms. Story 131. Sorry, this may sound strange, but the roof of my mouth feels unusual the day before I come down with a cold. It is probably related to my nose, but it is consistent. Story 132. The cat comes and gives me cuddles. Every time the cat gets it right, I feel unwell within a day or two. Story 133. I usually feel a tingle in the back of my throat that I can't seem to shake off, and then 2 days later I come down with a cold. Story 134. If I am about to get a cold, the skin just above my top lip goes red and sore. Otherwise, I experience a headache with anything that is wrong with me. Pulled a muscle in my leg, I get a headache. Not enough sleep, I get a headache. Full-blown flu, I get a headache. Story 135. Weird dreams are not caused by fevers. Any illness makes them more vivid and convoluted, often before I notice other symptoms. Story 136. The only thing I have is a headache. The bad part is I can't tell if I'm going to get really sick or if it's just a normal headache, so I get really scared every time I have a headache that I'm going to get sick. Story 137. I experience severe allergies almost daily during most seasons, and I also generally suffer from chronic sinus infections. Since I am constantly blowing my nose and sneezing, it can be difficult to determine when I am actually getting sick. Fortunately, when I have sinus infections, my mucus changes to green at the onset of any symptoms. This helps me know when to start isolating. Story 138. My smartwatch will tell me when my heart rate goes higher than normal, about 24 hours before I actually feel sick. I also experience general fogginess and aches. Story 139. I feel heavy and exhausted, and I usually get goosebumps that are hard to get rid of. I have issues regulating my temperature. Story 140. The back of my mouth, where my nose meets my throat, feels strange for hours, and then I start to feel chills. Story 141. Skin hurts with every touch. Clothing irritates my skin. Sitting causes discomfort. Blankets cause irritation. Story 142. I burp a lot. I don't usually burp, so this is a definite sign I'm run down. Then the sore throat and cough start, and that's that. Story 143. That postnasal drip that becomes more uncomfortable can be bothersome. I strongly believe in using nasal rinses to prevent colds and flu. Story 144. My throat is starting to hurt. As soon as I notice this, I know a cold is coming, so I get my cold medicine ready. Story 145. I don't really have those. I am chronically ill, so I am perpetually sick in one way or another all the time, sadly. But if you mean sick with a viral infection, when I got COVID, my incessant, painful coughing was what clued me in. That and my incredibly raspy voice. Story 146. My cat sits on me. Every time she's super grumpy and not cuddly at all. So when she wants cuddles, it's a sure sign I'm either coming down with something or about to start my period. Story 147. I experience pain in the joints of my knees, which progresses to pain in my wrist. Typically, about a day later, I become ill, sometimes on the same day. Story 148. I experience what I refer to as tiny bladder syndrome. I have to use the restroom frequently, and my bladder never feels fully empty. Even after I go, it feels like I need to go again. This is not a urinary tract infection. It occurs before I develop flu, sinus infections, strep throat, COVID-19, or any other viral or bacterial illness that causes a fever. An itchy or sore throat can be a sign of allergies, while swollen or painful eyes can result from congestion without being sick. However, if my bladder feels small or swollen, I am certain I will be unwell within the next 12 hours. Story 149. I wake up with a runny nose that lasts for hours. If I feel fine by the afternoon but wake up with the same symptoms the next day, I know I've caught an infection again. Story 150. When I hear myself say I never get sick and start buying Ricola candy because I just like them. Story 151. As soon as I feel something itching in my throat, I know I will have a fever the next day, usually around 38 to 39 degrees Celsius, followed by coughing the day after. Story 152. Unexplained lethargy is always the first sign for me. Then comes a decreased appetite and that uncomfortable feeling in my body. My skin starts to get sensitive, followed by my eyes and finally my nose and mouth. When those areas start to tingle and feel warmer, I know what to expect next. A fever is the last symptom for me. Most often, the symptoms last a day or two. Occasionally, once every 2 or 3 years, I get a severe case of the flu that puts me in bed for a week with a high fever and all the accompanying symptoms. Otherwise, I rarely get sick, except for the occasional sniffles during allergy season. I don't consider that being sick, just mild lethargy and a slightly stuffy nose. I can't remember the last time I had a stomach bug. I honestly think it has been more than 10 years. Story 153. When I go in the shower, I feel the need to increase the temperature, even though I normally don't like it that hot. Story 154. I keep sneezing, sometimes 3 sneezes in a row, and then the brain fog starts to set in. Story 155. My symptoms typically begin with temple pain, progressing to flu-like symptoms within a few days. Story 156. I'm not sure how to describe it, but my eyes hurt. It feels like an aching sensation, and it happens nearly every time. Story 157. My skin starts to hurt. I experience specific food aversions. I have a lump on the side of my neck that increases in size when I am ill. Story 158. For anyone experiencing a sore throat, try gargling with warm water, hotter than lukewarm, mixed with salt at night after brushing your teeth or after drinking water. Avoid eating or drinking anything afterward. Allow the salt water to remain in your throat. You may notice blood when you wake up the next day, but you will be fine. Trust me. Story 159. My brow bone starts aching before any other symptoms appear. I can sense when my husband is about to get sick before he shows any signs. Story 160. My lymph nodes, specifically the one behind my right ear and my neck, are always very reactive, especially when I am sick. A few days into an illness, I experience painful, swollen lymph nodes in several areas, but the one below my right ear has always been a clear indicator that I am starting to get sick, rather than just dealing with a dry throat or allergies. If I feel something off and palpate that area, and it is not swollen, I am confident in declaring myself not sick. However, if I notice that they are more pronounced, it has consistently indicated that I am unwell. Story 161. Every one of my senses becomes hypersensitive. It's like my body is becoming hyper-aware of my surroundings to protect me when I feel unwell. I can hear and smell much more than normal. My skin crawls at different fabric textures or breezes. It even seems like my eyesight sharpens, which is surprising since I have had a strong glasses prescription since I was a child. When any of this starts happening within about 24 hours, I am either bedridden, having a fever, tied to the toilet in one way or another, or all of the above. Story 162. I am feeling irritated due to my sweat, sore throat, and thick saliva. I manage this by drinking sodium ascorbate. Story 163. My heart rate increases by a few beats even though I feel completely fine. I only discovered this thanks to smartwatches. Story 164. Nasal discharge or a thorny feeling in your throat. At that point, I take paracetamol and cetirizine. Story 165. My head just feels slightly off. There's no way to describe it, but I always have this feeling of wrongness like 2 hours or so before getting a fever. Story 166. This is easy for me. I have Crohn's disease, so when I get sick, I experience severe diarrhea. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.